Hey Slayers, and welcome to a little series I like to call Sega History. And in this episode, the very first episode of Sega History, we're going to talk about the sg1000. So, get ready, sit back, grab a chair, and just listen. Okay, so the sg1000 is a home video game console manufactured by Sega and released in Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. And other regions, it was Sega's first entry into the home video game hardware business. Introduced in 1983, the SG-1000 was released on the same day as the Nintendo released the family computer, which is the Famicom, which we know here as the NES in America, which is actually crazy when you think about it, because the SG-1000 was very underpowered compared to the NES. But as we continue, go on. The SG-1000 was released in several forms, including the sc3000 computer, which we will do on an episode here on Sega History, and the redesigned SG-1000 Mark II, which we will also do probably next episode, released in 1984. A third iteration of the console, the Sega Mark III, was released in 1985. It provided a custom video display processor over previous iterations and served as the basis for the Master System in 1986, Sega's first internationally released console. So we will cover the Mark III and Master System in one whole episode. That'll probably be episode 3 after the Mark II, or I might do an episode on the sc3000, but okay. It was developed in response to the downturn in arcades in 1982. The SG-1000 was created on the advice of Hayao Nakayama, president of Sega Enterprises at the time. Shortly after the release, Sega Enterprises was sold to CSX Corporation, which was followed by the release of the SG-1002. The sc3000 and the SG-1000 line both supported a library of 76 ROM cartridges and 29 Sega MyCard games, all of which are fully compatible with the Mark III and the Japanese version of the Master System. In the early 1980s, Sega Enterprises, then a subsidiary of Gulf and Western, was one of the top 5 arcade game manufacturers active in the United States. As company revenue rose to $214 million, a downturn in the arcade business starting in 1982 seriously hurt the company, leading Gulf and Western to sell its North American arcade manufacturing organizations and the licensing rights for its arcade games to Bailey Manufacturing. The company retained Sega's North America R&D operation as well as its Japanese subsidiary Sega Enterprises, which with its arcade business in decline. Sega Enterprises president, I don't know, I never know how to say his first name. We'll just call him Nakayama because that's what I know how to say. Advocated that the company leverage its hardware expenses to move into the home console market in Japan, which was in its infancy at the time. Nakayama received permission to proceed. The first model to be developed was the sc3000, a computer with a built-in keyboard. But when Sega learned of Nintendo's plans to release a game console only, they began developing the SG-1000 alongside the sc3000 to keep costs down while ensuring significant longevity. Sega opted to create the platform from popular off-the-shelf components. Yeah, off-the-shelf components. I mean, when we look back, we know the SG-1000 was nowhere near as powerful as the NES. It was more on par with the ColecoVision, if you know what a ColecoVision is. But the SG-1000 was first released in Japan on July 15, 1983 at 15,000 yen. It was released on the same day as Nintendo launched the family computer Famicom in Japan. It was released simultaneously with the SC3000, also known as the Sega Personal Computer 3000, as well as the upgraded SC3000H. Though Sega themselves only released the SG-1000 in Japan, rebranded versions were released in several other markets worldwide, released as nearly the same time as the Japanese version. The SG-1000 was released in Australia through John Sands Electronics and in New Zealand by Grandstand Leisure. The Console also saw a release in Italy and Spain, but was not released in the larger video game markets of the United States, United Kingdom, or Germany. Despite this, an authorized clone system known as the Telegames Personal Arcade was produced and made available in the United States and Taiwan, and is able to play SG-1000 and ColecoVision games. See what I was saying about the SG-1000 being basically just a ColecoVision? And additionally, releases of the SG-1000 in Taiwan was done by Aeronox. The console enjoyed a brief period of popularity in Taiwan before the market was taken over by cheaper Famicom clones, or Famiclones as most of us knew, due in part to the SG-1000's steadier stream of release. Steadier, really? Stream of release? 21 SG-1000 games by the end of 1983, as compared to only 9 Famicom games, and in part to a recall of the Famicom units by a by a faulty circuit. The SG-1000 chalked up 160,000 units in sales in 1983, far exceeding Sega's projection of 50,000 units. Former Sega customers, hardware development head Hideki Sato. I'm sorry, I'm not good at pronouncing Japanese game names, but I'll try and say them the best I can. You can just, I'm sorry. Stated that because Sega had no predecessor, oh, the SG-1000 would sell so well, would have not predicted the SG-1000 would sell so well. The company became more enamored. Sorry, the reading I'm trying to do, because I'll just state this now. I'm reading this off the Wikipedia page. I'm just trying to get Sega history out there. But the device I'm reading on, it shows up small, so I have to like squint. So if I mispronounce words, that's why. With developing video game consoles, despite this, the 3 launch games, all of which were ported from Sega's VIC Dual Arcade board, lacked the name recognition of Famicom launch games Donkey Kong Jr., and Popeye. Shortly after their launch, Golf and Western began to divest itself of its non-core business. After the death of the company, founder Charles Blundorn, so Nakayama and former Sega CEO David Rosen, we know David Rosen, I'll get to that when I discuss the full history of Sega. Right now we're on consoles, arranged a management buyout of the Japanese subsidiary in 1984 with financial backing from CSX Corporation, a prominent Japanese software company. Nakayama was then enlisted as CEO of the new Sega Enterprises Ltd. Following the buyout, Sega released another console, the SG-1002, on July 31st, 1984, at 15,000 yen. The SG-1002 replaced the hardware joystick with two detachable joypads, and I'll bring up the SG-1000 Mark II now. So we'll just bring up this 1000. We'll just not marked. We want to see 2. So we'll bring up the Mark II now. That looks like the Mark III, but I'm guessing that's the Mark II. Yeah, okay. The Mark II, here's the Mark II right here. So wait, where are we? Okay, so the SG-1002 replaced the hardwired joystick with 2 detachable joypads. Sato disliked the original cartridges, saying they look like small black tombstones when inserted in the console, and later remarketed that this proudest achievement of the SG-1000 era was replacing them with the cheerier, pocket-sized Sega My Cards. Sega My Cards, that's a great name. Sega also employed popular Owari comedy duo Tunless. I don't know to pronounce, to provide celebrity endorsement for the console. Sorry, it's like I said, it's very small and I have to squint my eyes to read it, so I'm sorry. By 1984, the Famicom's success began to outpace the SG-1000. The Famicom had more advanced hardware, allowing it to perform smoother scrolling and more colorful sprites, and Nintendo boosted its games library by counting third-party developers, whereas Sega was less than eager to collaborate with the same companies they were competing with in the arcades. The SG-1000 was also coming up against game consoles from companies including Tommy and Bandai. This would result in the release of the Sega Mark III in Japan in 1985, which later became the Master System worldwide. The last cartridge released was Portrait of Loretta on February 18, 1987. In 2006, the GameTap subscription gaming service added an emulator of the SG-1000 and several playable titles. So that's the story of the SG-1000. Now I'm going to state the specifications. I'm going to tell you the specifications. Sorry, like I said, it's small, but I want to get Sega's history out here in somewhere, so in some way, because not a lot of people know about the history. Okay, so the SG-1000 is powered by an 8-bit Zilog Z80 central processing unit running at 3.58 megahertz for the SG-1000 and SG-1002, and at 4 megahertz for the SC3000. Its video processor is a Texas Instrument TM-S992AA, capable of displaying up to 16 colors, and its sound processor is a Texas Instrument SN76489. All three chips were also used in the ColecoVision. That's why I said it's basically just a ColecoVision. The system includes 8 kilobits and 1 kilobyte of random access memory, RAM. The controller is a hardwired to the system in the original model and detachable in the SG-1000 Mark II. Video and audio output are supplied through an RF switch. Power is supplied through a 9-volt DC converter connected to an AC converter. Several peripherals exist for the SG-1000 series, available at 13,000 yen? At the time of release, the sc1000 keyboard connected through the expansion slot and is compatible with all models. Multiple controllers were created, including the sg1000 joystick attached to the SG-1000 and the sj150 joypad made for use with the SG-1002. A racing wheel known as the sh400 was made for use with games such as Monaco GP. The C1000 card catcher sold at 1,000 yen, allowing players to play Sega My Card titles. Additionally, accessories existed solely for use with the sc3000, including the SR1000 cassette deck, the SP400 4-color plotter printer, and the SF7000 expansion device, which adds a floppy disk drive and additional memory. And then we'll get to the games now. Sega's software library for the SG-1000 and SC3000 comprises of 42 cartridges and 29 Sega My Cards releases that required the card catcher add-on. There was also 26 educational and programming cartridges for the SC3000 that could only be played on the SG-1000 with the SK1000 keyboard peripheral. Titles of the system included Flicky, Congo Bongo, which I want to do a history video on Congo Bongo. I will get to that. Sega Galaga and Girls Garden. The first video game programmed by Sonic the Hedgehog developer Yuji Naka. The library included licensed titles such as Gola Go 13 Packing. I never even heard packaging. I never even heard of that game, and game manuals came with both Japanese and English text until 1984, when manuals were switched to Japanese only and the size of the cartridge box was reduced. Hideyuki Sato stated that Sega lacked adequate staff to develop games for the console at the time. SC3000 SG-1000 games were continued to be produced after the launch of the Mark III in 1985. The last two SC3000 SG-1000 cartridges games were The Castle in 1986 and Portrait of Loretta in 1987. The final Sega My Card game for the SC3000 and SG-1000 was the Black Onyx, also in 1987. Now, we'll do the legacy. The SG-1000 made little impact on the video game industry, but has been recognized for being Sega's first video game console. Retro gamer writer Damian McFerrin said it was an abject failure, but it and the SG-1000 the Japanese forefathers of the Master System. Writing for Wild, Chris Kohler criticized the poor response of the controller's joystick and the lack of an RCA output. He said the release timing hurt its success, although its graphics were of better quality than most consoles on the market. It had the bad luck to be released in the same month as Nintendo world-changing Famicom, which had killer apps like Donkey Kong and could run circles around Sega's hardware. Of its legacy, Kohler said few have heard of it, even fewer have played it, and the games weren't that great anyway. By contrast, Luke Plummer of Kodaca recognized that while all this makes it sound like the SG-1000 was a bit of a misfire, it was important in the development of Sega's console business. Hideaki Seto reflected positively on the innovations in the development of the SG-1000, but admitted that the console had limitations because of how new the market was and that Sega was inexperienced in developing for a video game console at the time. According to Sato, the problem was while we knew how to make arcade games, we didn't really know anything about console development. In fact, the very idea of a consumer marketing for video games was unheard of then. Back then, it was just a new business idea. So, that right there is the history of the SG-1000. Join me next to... Oh, and also the Mark II. And the sc3000 computer. Sorry. Join me next Sega History, which is next Friday, for Sega History Part 2, when we cover the Mark III and the Sega Master System. But until then, see you, Slayers.